Thank you, Judge Richard Okrent, for coming in tonight. And I was hoping we'd have a larger group, but I think this is certainly a timely conversation to have about challenges facing reporters in the field. Just as a bit of background for you, you did say that you've been with the Supreme Court, the Superior Court in Snohomish for 15 years, but that you are a Husky who studied history and went on, I believe, to a master's degree at UCLA, also in history.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and then law school at University of Puget Sound, which is now Seattle University, my alma mater. But thank you for also volunteering and serving on the fire brigade as part of the bench press bar committee. So, could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Well, Washington State is a very unique state with respect to the relationship between the press and the courts. It's one of the few states in the union that has a organization called the Bench Bar Press Committee. It's over 60 years old. I'm a member of that board, and the fire brigade is liaison between the courts and the media. The Bench Bar Press Committee puts on a number of seminars every year. It issues literature such as the Media Guide, which I'm currently working on editing. And it serves as an overarching attempt to integrate both the press and the courts together. I mean, we have a very strong policy in Washington State of open court and transparency. And early on, as we moved towards transparency and open court, and more of the barriers went down, it became obvious that we needed some sort of liaison. So what I do is the fire brigade. I'm the chair of the fire brigade. Okay, it's really the Bench Bar Press Fire Committee liaison committee, but it's been nicknamed the fire brigade for 50 years, and I'm probably the, I don't know, 30th fire chief. I don't know, something like that. I even have a hat to prove it. Anyway, but our job is to facilitate and mediate between the media and the court so that everything runs smoothly and so that everybody gets their day in court. And, we have to balance an interesting tension, which is the citizenry's right to know and to be transparent, to understand how the legal system's working, and the individual's right to privacy, which is always, clashing in the courtroom, as well as the court's ability to smoothly administer justice. So the fire brigade, that's pretty much what we do. We try to facilitate those things. I get calls on average of twice a month, as well as the rest of my brigade members, about 5 of us, from all across the state and sometimes all across the other states regarding these kinds of issues. A lot of it deals with GR 16, which deals with recording in the courtroom, GR 31, which deals with public records, GR 38, which deals with sealing, and general issues about, various types of courts and various types of cases. So that's basically what I do as in addition to my other duties. And, edit things, send out things. From my perspective, it's fascinating to see how the press corps has changed with respect to Washington State courts. When I started out practicing 40 years ago, there were actually reporters who were assigned to the courts. In Everett, we had Jim Haley, who was famous. We miss him. And nowadays, with the large turnover, there's a certain lack of understanding of what we do. And judges, let's be honest, we're not public affairs officers. We're not all extroverts. And so we are a little bit reluctant to find out what you do or to interact because, sometimes you don't want to be in the press and because it will affect the safety of judges. It has affected in recent years the safety of judges. Sometimes a case that you involved in, and the press covers it, and sometimes you get bad comments, and sometimes recently those comments become action. And so we have to be very, very careful about that. But that's another lecture for another day and another time, I suppose. But part of the job really as fire brigade chief is to educate everyone like I'm doing now, showing people how the courts work, helping the media get into the court and get into the story, teaching people how to actually read files and make interviews, teaching judges that you don't have to be afraid to make a statement so long as you follow the code of ethics. And that's basically what I do as a fire brigade chief. Do you want me to just take questions? And by the way, I want to thank you for having me. This is a lot of fun, and I really do enjoy speaking. Do you want me to take questions, or would you like me to outline some things about the relationship between the court and the recent immigration issues?
Well, let's go with that. I think we'll be pulling up some questions along the way, but I also wanted to point out that in the chat, I had pulled together some resources that are circulated among some of the journalism organizations nationally, as reporters are facing different challenges in light of all the recent kinds of protests that go much farther back than some of the Black Lives Matters. So more importantly, in my experience, one of my reporters recently reported, feeling insecure as someone who is a dreamer to do their duty as a reporter. So I don't know if you can just widely converse about some of the challenges and opportunities that you see to help educate us better on our rights.
Well, I'll start with, I think, with outlining how the courts responded to the ICE issue. Um, Generally, we have to balance the need to follow the law with the need to make sure the law is not excessively followed. Everyone has a right to come to court regardless of their immigration status. We had a case, I believe, in Clark County recently in which a gentleman was a defendant in a lawsuit, in a criminal lawsuit. He was doing everything we wanted him to do. He was coming to court. He wasn't getting warrants. And he shows up for his trial and he gets arrested by ICE. And it's outside the courthouse, but this is the kind of thing that it's totally anathema to Washington state policy. And these are the kinds of things that we need to be following. Years ago, there was a little trick that ICE used to do with credit companies. So if immigrants owed credit and they were coming to court for some sort of debt relief or debt enforcement, so the collection company would drop, as I say, would drop a note to immigration that so-and-so was coming, and they would then be subsequently arrested in the courthouse. This doesn't happen anymore, but I wanted to point out that these kinds of abuses are not necessarily new. And of course, protests in this country is not necessarily new. What I think is new is two things. Number one, the use of ICE to enforce the law in a manner which is not diplomatic, for lack of a better term. And number two, the tendency right now in the United States on both sides of the ledger, and this is my own opinion, to resort to violence and violent type activities, the type of which we have not seen in this country since the Civil War, quite frankly. Historically, I think it goes back to January 6th, in which I think people have been given permission to use violence, both in the left and the right. And of course, since October 7th, we have seen that version of it. It's become part of our political system, which puts the media, I think, at a bit of a risk, because you now have always the potential at these protests for things to go out of control, and you've got to cover it. So I just wanted to point that out. I'm going to get to some of the ways you can protect yourselves. But I wanted to give that as an overview to understand my perspective of what's happening. And of course, as a judge, I may ultimately have to enforce these things. We had an issue in Federal Way shortly after October 7th, in which the freeway was shut down, and people refused to leave when the officers gave them, directives. The press covered it quite well. They stayed out of the violent part. There was resistance. And ultimately, what happens is the federal way judge has to figure out how to manage their courtroom with 250 protesters who are in the audience and 50 people that they have to arraign, and how to keep decorum. And it's not very easy. And you can imagine how much more difficult it is when we want the press to be there. But on the other hand, we don't want anybody in a riot. So that case became a management problem, and the federal way judge did a great job of managing it. She was excellent. But this was something we had to figure out: where to put the press, where to put security, what were the ground rules going to be in a private space. So basically, if you go to the Bench Bar Press website, you will see a set of directives from the Supreme Court, our Washington State Supreme Court, called Model Practices. And I just want to go over a few of those before I get to the question of how do you defend yourself and protect yourself in the modern day protest movement. So first of all, as I've always indicated, that we are committed to transparency and open courts. So we're going to try to make sure that the press is not interfered with. And that's why we do this. So we have policies that prohibit participation or aid in immigration enforcement when they're illegally done. So there are legal ways to do it and illegal ways to do it, and we are definitely going to do that. We recognize that there's a different balance between the judicial branch and the executive branch, but on the other hand, the court is our private public our public space controlled by the court, and that means by that I mean we control the procedure of the public space, and so we don't want people's rights trampled on. So civil arrest on or near courthouse facilities is allowed, but courthouse personnel shall not aid or support any person being subject to arrest or having their freedom restricted or hindered solely but for civil immigration offenses while present in or going to or returning from the courthouse. Some courthouses have about a thousand feet. Others have had up to 1 mile radius for this happening. Now, I have to tell you that this is not being honored, but this is our aspiration. And we will only enforce valid court orders or judicial warrants when necessary to secure the immediate safety of judges, courthouse personnel, or the public. Where circumstances otherwise permit warrantless arrest pursuant to the statute, you have to have probable cause. You can't just arrest somebody because they're an immigrant at the courthouse. Courthouse personnel cannot gather information related to immigration. They can't aid immigration in the pursuit of the civil arrests. That includes arresting the press, by the way, in case that happens. They can't give information regarding a person's citizen status to anyone absent a court order. They can't provide personal information for any person or entity involving in immigration purposes unless by the same method is available to the public, subject to court order, or otherwise state or federal law. So in other words, if ICE has a legitimate warrant or legitimate need to be at the courthouse to arrest someone, then you cannot interfere with that, regardless of how you feel about it. But the court is not, the Washington State Court is not going to facilitate that. And it's basically a time-honored understanding that show me your right to be here and to do what you want to do, and show me where there's a law that supersedes my need to keep my courthouse safe and to keep the rights of the individuals maintained. So before authorizing access to any public area, courthouse personnel must confirm that there's a valid court order issued by either a U.S. District Court judge or a magistrate, which has the specific information. I just want to let you understand this is how we operate. They have to have a valid copy of a court order. They have to identify the citation to the federal law violation from which the court order was issued. In other words, they just can't show up and say, this person is illegal, we get to take him. There has to be a reason. Perhaps they have a reason, such as a federal citation for drug trafficking. That's a valid reason. Identifying which U.S. District Court issued the order. It can't be some secret magistrate working for ICE. It has to be a valid district court of the United States. Verifying that the order includes the correct date and location for enforcement, and confirming that a U.S. District Court judge or magistrate signed that order. Immigration officials come with those things, then we will enforce those orders. We're obligated to do so. But if they're coming and exercising authority that's not warranted under the Constitution, our courts will not aid them. And we're instructing our people not to aid them. All courthouse contracts, partnerships, and programs between the courthouse and other public or private entities, including leases, agreements, memorandums of understanding, have to be consistent with those policies, including provisions protecting personnel and the public from immigration enforcement. So basically, the state court is not going to allow immigration or any other authority or pseudo authority to simply trample on the protections of citizens and disrupt the procedure of the court. I haven't seen any lawsuits brought yet against ICE for violation of these procedures. I've talked about Clark County. I know there are some in Whatcom County that have gone on. I heard a story about Yakima, but I haven't verified that one. But it's clear that ICE agents are not following their own procedures in many of these situations. Now, why is that important for the press? Because I think the press needs to expose these stories. They need to be watching for these stories and trying to figure out a way to monitor these kinds of cases where immigration is coming for a civil arrest to a state court without valid court orders. And that's very, very important. And I think perhaps one of the things that is not covered so well is this issue with respect to ICE. I would also note that there hasn't been a lot of activity in front of the courthouses other than those 3 instances that I saw. I think perhaps they got the message, and nor have we seen the kind of protests at the courthouse complex that we saw during the era of the 1%, where people were camping out on the courthouse lawns. So that's not happening. But there are other things that are happening. So having given you the framework, at least from the judiciary standpoint, our standpoint is we're going to protect the press where we can, we're going to protect the citizen where we can, and we're going to make sure that court runs smoothly because, of course, that's what we want in the administration of justice, smooth activity. So the question then becomes, what can you do when you're covering these issues? And not just immigration. I think it's important to understand this type of protests that we're seeing now. As I said, it's a protest that has a violent element in it at any time. And so if you're covering this, I think you have to be wary of that because you don't want to be swept up in that. That's the first thing. The second thing I think people need to be aware of is that we're in an era of paid protesters. It's become kind of a semi-profession now. And I follow a lot of these protest bloggers and protest Facebookers and these people who chase after these guys who are paid protesters. And I do that because I think it's important for me to understand that world in order to be able to understand what's happening and what I may have to enforce. So we're in an era where there are, well, I'd like to say from my radical days, paid cadres. All right? Paid cadres, this is their job. They're agitators. Their job is to create chaos, not to protest an issue. So you have to be wary of that. On the other side, we also have people who are, well, they say they're press, but you give anybody a cell phone and what's the word I want, a platform on the internet, and they're press. And so they're looking to make money. And how do they make money? They're going to agitate the protest groups, regardless if it's left or right. Everybody does it. They're going to agitate them to prove their points and to monetize their channels. So you have a lot of these people now who are confrontational for various reasons. So when you have that kind of tension, you have to be very wary if you're legitimate press, if you're covering this, because you don't want to be swooped up in it. On the other hand, you should be aware, I think, of some of the dynamics within the protest movements, both on the left and on the right. And it includes there are no kings. There it includes immigration protests. It includes all these things because if you study the current protests, and I've been doing this, you will see that this is different. This is very different. It's performative theater to some extent. And lots of good people who have lots of following, lots of good causes don't understand, I think, to some extent, how they could be led into a riot without any trouble. And so I think the press has to be aware for their own safety that when they cover these things, first of all, you have to protect yourself and know what you're doing before you're going to do this. So I would suggest, and I've got some guidelines from the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, which I kind of follow them. They're very interesting guidelines, and I want to go over that with everybody. First of all, do your homework ahead of time. I think that's a good idea. I think you need to know who the protesters are, what elements are within the protest groups, and pick your targets of how you want to cover that particular group or that particular element. All of this is important. Everybody wants to know what's going on, and you have to balance that, I think, as always, against the fact that you're kind of being used for performative reasons. So that's the first thing. Number two, make sure if you're going to one of these things that you have legal support. Does your paper or your magazine or your blog or your radio station have legal support? So in case you do get in trouble, you can say to someone, my lawyer is so and so, and I have rights, and here's my card. I think that's really important, particularly when you run into what I call protest security. These are not officers of the law. These are people either volunteering to be security or paid to be security, whose sole job is to not let you talk to the members of their movement. And if you get too close, they will result in violence. Now, we've seen it on the right for years, but the right has had smaller numbers than the left. But watch some of the videos, and I think of these protests, and I think you'll be astounded by how people are not getting their story because they can't get in, because there's security. So know your right that you can be in public places. They can't stop you. If they're officers, police officers, well, you have to follow the directive of a lawful police officer. But if they're just security, what is that? I don't understand that. Show me your card. So that's the first thing. Have a lawyer. Number two, research the location of the protest and the nearby police precincts. Know where the police officers are because you may need them to help you also. You never know when some fool is going to hit you over the head and you're going to want support. And it has happened, and good people have gotten hurt. Uh, Identify those people who would be adversarial to the press. And that, if you can find that out, you do that research. Would that be in the right or the left? I'm bipartisan. So as I said, I watch all of this stuff. I'm fascinated with this. But I think you need to know where the sections are that are, what people don't want to talk to you and don't want to be filmed and what they will do. Research riot control tactics in the area being personally protected equipment is appropriate. Yeah, I think that's important to try to figure out what they're going to do to control the riot or control the march, how that's done, and make sure that it's done in a proper way because we have the right to assemble. And also, I think you do need at this time to bring protective. If you're coming with a team, that's one thing. But if someone comes after you and you don't have mace or something to protect yourself, you could be seriously hurt. And you don't want to be seriously hurt with the officer somewhere down the road working on some other issue. You need to protect yourself. Make sure that you have your attorney's phone number with you, and never go alone. Never go alone into these protests. And I would also add, bring your press credentials. Wear your jacket. Show them your card. Show them that you're legitimate. Not just some blogger or some fellow traveler or some anti-fellow traveler or whatever, that you're not there to monetize your YouTube's channel. You're there to report what's going on and explain what's going on. I'll give you an example of something that really outraged me. I don't know if you're familiar with, there was in Issaquah High School here in the King County, there was one of our right-wing bloggers who's I think she's semi-legitimate. Miss Krause just won a PRP case. I call her semi-legitimate because, she's not part of the regular media, but excuse me, I'm sorry. But she kind of she's right about this. So the high school, Issaquah High School, let all these people out to protest, which was wrong because they didn't inform the parents in the first place. But that's a whole nother set of laws they violated. But the kids saw this as a right to riot. And they weren't supervised by the teachers, and the teachers weren't going to help them. So Ms. Krause, she goes in there and she's agitating to back up her website, right, to support her website. And she gets hit, or one of her friends gets hit. And this total riot. Another guy, I think it was in Renton High School, the same thing happened. So you have to be aware that these things will happen. And the bigger story, I think, in those situations is, why did the school districts allow these high school kids who aren't supposed to go off campus in the first place for their own safety, right? Why did they just simply out willy-nilly to go and protest? I don't know where the educational moment was there, but certainly it was a mistake. So number one, bring your government ID with you, your press ID. Always be willing to present yourself as a journalist and explain who you are, what media you're with. I think that's very important. Be very careful that you don't get swept up into a situation where the police will have probable cause to arrest you. And this has happened. Sometimes you get caught up in the moment and you interfere with what appears to you to be an illegal act. Don't get involved in it, because then you're giving probable cause to an officer that you're committing the crime of either obstructing justice, resisting an officer, interfering with the right to arrest someone, interfering with a violent process, and now you're in trouble. Because now, if they have probable cause to arrest you, they can search you. Search incident to a lawful arrest, they're searching you what? For contraband. Well, you probably don't have contraband, but who wants to get searched, right? Who wants to go through that hassle and then get charged? And this has happened. And so I want to make sure everybody understands that probably the best bet is never to interfere with what appears to be an arrest or attempt to secure a zone. Cover it. I think it's different to cover it than to be carried away in it. And if you're in it, get out of it. Take the picture you need, ask the question you need, but get into the backfield as quick as you can. Because, if push comes to shove and you get tear gassed, you didn't have a nice day. And the story is, right, journalist gets tear gassed at Mothers Against Drug Driving protest. So you need to be, it's facetious, but I want to be very serious that these things have happened. And you don't want to be involved with that. You want to make sure the public knows what they need to know about the issues. Um, I mean, fortunately, so far we haven't had many issues in which ICE across the country has arrested journalists or shot at journalists or hurt journalists. They're not that stupid, but anything can happen when, the adrenaline is flowing. Um, so I think it'd be very, very careful. I've seen journalists in New York City, for example, get knocked down. Legitimate people get knocked down. One of these security goons comes out of the crowd and just pushes them down. So I think you have to be very careful. Also, be careful, I think, if someone doesn't want to talk to you, don't press it. This is what the YouTubers do, and this is what people are expecting people to do. And so they now have their own protocol for that's it's concerning to me. If you're stopped by the police, explain that you're covering a protest as a journalist and immediately show your credentials and engage with them. I think that's the best way is to get them on, to get them on your side, or at least to get them to be ready to protect you when you need protection. Engage with them. If you have a moment before you go to the local precinct, say, I'm Richard Okrent, I'm with ABC, I'm going to be covering the protest today. Just want to let you know who I am, where I am, and if you can be any help for my security, I'd appreciate it. Or what are the rules for today's protest? Where are people going for today's protest? What are the limits? Where's the march going to start? Where's the march going to end? And I think that's important. I think people don't do enough of that. Uh, they don't. If police attempt to search your equipment, you don't have to consent to it. Okay, so they don't get to see your phones. They don't get to see your cameras. They don't get to see your notebooks, unless you're lawfully arrested. In which case, they're going to say it's a search incident to a lawful arrest. But you don't have to consent. You can ask for a warrant, but don't confront them. Let your lawyer do the work after that. So remember, that's why you have a lawyer, so that and that's why you take notes. If you're in a confrontation situation, you're professionals, write it down, make notes for it. I used to tell my clients that if you're ever, you want to get something done, write a declaration as soon as possible, because that gives me, as an attorney, the means to go to court fast, and then I can do stuff. I can seek injunctions. I don't know if anybody's using drones. Drones are coming into play, but I've recently heard that people were trying to throw rocks at drones during a couple of these things. I don't know if they're legitimate drones or not legitimate drones, but everybody has toys. These are the new toys, and you can gather information with them. Certainly find out what the rules are with respect to that. You could, if you had the chance ahead of time, find out who the leaders of these protest movements are, maybe interview them. Maybe the story is there, I think the public would like to know. And of course, there's so many human interest stories in these protest movements. But the bottom line is protect yourself, know your rights, know where you can go, where you can't go, and don't get caught up in the moment. That's really my basic speech, and I certainly would entertain all kinds of questions about this. It's a fascinating issue for me.
Well, thank you. My first question is kind of tied off what you were just saying about recording as many specifics about an encounter as a protection for yourself. But what about, speaking of electronics, recording it with your phone in reverse, with your interaction with the police officer?
It's not a problem, but you should tell them you're going to record it. They don't have to engage with you. You're out in a public space, so how the right of privacy is limited in a public space. But they may not wish to engage with you.
They sure probably wouldn't.
No, some of them might. It depends
Yeah.
upon where you're at. And there's a story there too. I think there's always a story in how they protect people from things getting out of hand, because generally people do a good job of that. So that's my answer. Be careful.
Okay, it's a good one. Yeah. I also like that you're recommending, folks come equipped with their at least newsroom editor's phone number. I don't know if some of the folks who's on the here this evening have a staff attorney, but it would be nice. Tim, did you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on, I believe you mentioned something about paid protesters. Can you cite any notable examples of this, especially in Washington State?
In Washington State, without getting partisan, some of the anti-Israel protesters have been basically on the payroll of George Soros through holding companies. It's well known. Uh, Particularly some of the equipment they're using, pre-printed flags that you can get on Amazon now, tents that are brand new. Uh, there are several bloggers, legitimate agencies such as the ADL have been tracking these people. And it's not just the Arab-Israeli issue. It happens to do a lot with other issues in which you've got people who are essentially paid agitators. And if you confront them, you have to, how do I explain this? You have to go to the websites of these organizations and you start seeing a pattern where so and so, who is the assistant outreach officer for, say, the committee for more progressive pineapple growers, okay? And you start seeing that person. Well, that person's also at the Black Lives Matters protest as a security guard and a speaker. The person is also at the ICE, anti-ICE, as a security guard and a speaker. The person's also there at an anti-abortion rally as a speaker and security. And it's nothing to do with their cause. It has to do with the fact that they are being paid to be part of that cause. And there's nothing wrong with it if it's a living. I mean, these are people that, they're paid to do a job. And there are a lot of political activists who that's how they make their living. Look, there are a lot of lobbyists who make their living in the political process. It's just that we are not used to protest movements having paid people involved in the protest. It's a whole different, what's the word I want? It's new. It's new and it's becoming exposed. It's something to look at. Any other questions on that?
I don't know. Joining us also is Nicole Jennings, who is works at the Seattle U Law School in communications and runs the Lawyer magazine. But I don't know, Nicole, what the word on campus there is and what you monitor.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's exciting to have an alum. In fact, when you said that you had gone to UPS, I was kind of cheering. Um, excuse me, I'm homesick today, but I guess my question would be, it's something you touched on a little bit, but I have run into this both when I used to be a reporter for Cairo Radio. I've run into it on both sides of the aisle, both when I was in the CHOP reporting from the ground there, always by myself, never with a bodyguard or anything, and then also um, when I reported, so that was more the left side, and then when I reported from all of the COVID protests, the people who didn't want to wear masks and who were
Right.
protesting the vaccine cards and all of that from the right. In both instances, I encountered protesters they were peaceful, but they did not want to see a journalist there. And so immediately their guard was up when they saw me. It was like a cat arching its back, kind of like, ugh, get away, journalist. Um, do you have any tips for, I guess, not so much staying safe, but because I never felt threatened necessarily by any of these people, but I also didn't exactly feel welcomed, and it was a little bit of a hostile feeling.
Yeah.
So do you have any tips for, I guess, being, being kind of welcomed as part of the group without joining in on the protest?
Well, one of the issues is who controls the narrative. And if you're running a protest or a rally or something, right? The people who are running the protest, the leadership wants to control the narrative. They don't want someone from outside to even contribute to the narrative because it interferes with the political goal of getting your desires out. And only those people that they will trust will they talk to. And they inform their people, don't talk to so and so. That's why you're getting the effect where in the past you might not have gotten that. I mean, watch the coverage of the civil rights in the 1960s, and reporters, they're very welcome. They want them because they want that part of the narrative. So my answer is very carefully, you need to figure out who the leadership is and get an opportunity to speak to that leadership, but be cautious, I think, because they have all leadership has its own political agenda, obviously, but as trained journalists, you can expose those things that are, inconsistent with that. They're not, the coming trend is not to let the rank and file protester speak to the journalists. And part of that has to do with the monetization of the YouTubers.
Yeah, this was definitely something I noticed. Definitely like a marked change between, say the Women's March and the Pink Hat protests in 2016, 2017, 2018. Everyone there was very much willing to talk to journalists. It was press were welcome. I even wore one of the pink hats too, although I realized later I shouldn't have done that because that was not being impartial. But it seemed like something really shifted around 2020, where all of a sudden the media was seen kind of by the extremes on both sides, I should say, not by the maybe regular protesters, but certainly by the extremes on both sides. Media was seen as the enemy. And that was something I had to get used to.
I agree.
Thank you. I appreciate.
And it hurts. It influences your ability to protect yourself. And from my standpoint, I want people's rights to be protected, and I want people to have the right to protest. I don't want anybody hurt either. So I think you have to be very, very careful. And I see sometimes when I watch, and of course I'm getting a skewed view when I'm doing this research. I'm looking at YouTube, I'm watching the TV. You got to be very careful who you put that microphone in front of, I think, at some points. Because you never know what's going to happen. And what happens if you're talking to somebody and security comes and shuts them up? How are you going to react to that without, are you going to extradite yourself from that situation, or are you going to press on to get the story? It's a hard decision to make, especially if you're alone. So
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. See, we have a question here from Michael. If a protest involves entering a building, should a reporter enter to cover? Using a UW protest where student media is indoors and protesters are locked doors and the media was locked in.
Well, depends upon whether they're public or private spaces. For example, if they're coming into the courthouse and they're in the public space in the courthouse, which in my courthouse is the area between the security guard posts, then I think everyone's invited. It's a public space and the reporter should go in there. But if the protesters are penetrating the security, the reporter shouldn't follow them, because the response of my security team is, okay, you basically you've now created a crime. You're in the private spaces. You're interfering with somebody's, adoption case or somebody's criminal case or someone's land use case. Once you get into those areas that are not public spaces, then we have to protect not only our own security, but also the rights of the individuals. You don't want people interfering with that, and it's a balance. So my answer would be, yeah, go into the public spaces, but be careful when they start going into private spaces, and probably retreat when things are getting, violent. I mean, there are areas in the courthouse that anybody can go into a family law court and watch the court proceedings. It's open court. Nobody's allowed in my chambers.
Sure.
Right? Anybody can go into my courtroom and sit in the courtroom. It's open court. And if they're legitimate press agents, right, and show me their press credentials, they can cover anything they want. They can record if they follow GR 16. But you can't get in the face of the prosecutor when your prosecutor's doing their job because you don't like prosecution. And if there's a whole group of people there that are supporting the defendant, I mean, we had some of these gang cases. That's what happens. You've got a lot of these gang members in the back. I'm trying to keep them under wraps, and then they see somebody who's trying to agitate them, and it can be real problematic. But generally, to answer your question, public space is public space, part of open court. You have the right to be there.
And ditto on a university campus, a state-owned university campus.
Only the public spaces. I mean, yeah. I don't think you can go into the offices or the labs.
Right.
And generally, some of these places should be marked. Not everything is marked because no one's really anticipating these things from happening.
Yeah.
If a space is marked private or public can't go beyond this, and you penetrate that spot, you're trespassing. So there's a certain amount of government protection that we need, especially clerk's offices. You don't want anything in the clerk's office to be disturbed. That's all your records, all my records.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, you don't want that.
Michael's second question here is he works for a small publication with a lean budget. So if he is hurt covering a protest, should he exit and cease reporting? I suppose that's what happens.
Yes, I think so. I think so. Get a friend.
Self-preservation.
Safety is first, and have somebody who's still covering. Maybe you have someone from another affiliate who
Yeah.
can, you can say, look, I'm not getting out of here. Could you cover the rest of this for me? I'll tell you something else that might be interesting. I don't know how the states handle it, but we have most counties have legal services, free legal services, and you might be able to what's the word I want? You might be able to ask for them to provide you some sort of legal advice. One question, that's not conceptually the question. If the company says I'm liable on my own, should I simply leave? The answer is yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If they're not going to protect you, you don't want to be suing because you got knocked over and hurt and your company's not going to protect you. Yeah. That's a problem.
And then his question about freelancers.
I can't read it. What's the question?
A freelancer has agreed to go on assignment to cover a protest. Is the company liable for what happens to that person if covering the protest?
My answer is I don't know the answer to that. But my lawyer Buzz says go look at the contract that the freelancer signed with the press entity to see what's covered. Certainly, if I was representing the freelancer, I'd probably have some sort of indemnity clauses, insurance clauses in there to protect both myself from being sued for not protecting my agent and also the agent, the freelancer, from getting hurt. So yeah, you don't go into those contracts without seeing there's some protection there.
Good advice. And then speaking generally of advice, on the resources that I collected, I did put the Fire Brigade's email and such, but can you tell of an example where someone called you after an encounter and, what is the turnover time? How often is that email monitored? That kind of thing.
Well, encounters a good question. I don't see a lot of encounters, but I do get a lot of questions. So the way this works, I'm glad you asked this because I've always want to talk about it. The way this works is I'm monitoring my email all day long. And if I get a question, then I try to answer it within an hour. And if I can't answer it, I send the question out to my team and I say, can anybody answer this? We'll come back and we'll come back and roundtable it later. So that sometimes it happens where somebody needs to know something and they have a deadline and we know there are deadlines. So if I can't answer it, members of the team can, and you don't always have to go directly to me. I mean, if I'm not available, then Brandon Johnson over in Walla Walla is available, or Dave Keenan in King County, or Brandon Biggs in Spokane, Robert Jordan in Chelan. They're all available. One way or the other, we're committed to answering your question as fast as possible and trying to help as quickly as we can. Because we know that your deadlines are just hard and issues are coming on now. I don't always get off the bench, but if it's serious enough, I will. I mean, sometimes I have to do my job, but
yeah, sometimes
we do keep a tight monitoring.
Well, that's terrific. I feel very protected in Washington. I don't think, like you said, your early remarks, a lot of other states don't have such a devoted set of protections and open inquiry.
Yeah, we want that. And we're very proud of that in Washington State. We think it's a value that we want to support and continue to expand and support.
Great. Well, I think in turn, we want to do whatever we can on our end to keep it working. And I guess the first step is to, keep our news organizations in business. So
I think so. One thing I want to add,
sure.
As judges, we're public figures, but we're not politicians. We're really not trained. We're lawyers and decision makers. And so one thing we don't understand is we don't understand the relationship. In other words, I'd like a reporter to come visit me. and tell me what they're doing so I can tell them what I'm doing. I like to have people go around the courthouse and explain the various facets of government because we have to really develop a relationship between the two of us. So I'm not so gun shy when a reporter comes and asks me a question. Now, my ethical responsibilities don't let me comment on any given case that's before me or that's active. But I can comment about general legal principles that you might be interested in understanding so that you can cover something. I mean, I can't cover about a particular case, but I can facilitate your ability to report. You know, we had a case, let's see, how do I explain this? We had a case in Snohomish County involving a shooter at the Alderwood Mall, and the press was trying to get certain information, which they had a legitimate right to. But the problem was it was too early in the investigation, and had the government released that material, they would have compromised everything. And so you have to balance even the right of the state of Washington to prosecute their case. And the defendant's attorney didn't want the material to be released because there was information there that would affect his client's case. So I put a 30-day hold on that after explaining myself to everyone. Look, in this situation, this is a fluid situation. There are things that they can tell you, but most of these things we're going to have to wait 30, 60 days until the case is actually filed. And so sometimes that happens, but this is the kind of thing the fire brigade does. Yeah.
I think you do a lot more than that, but like this evening's remarks. So if anyone has a last question, we can squeeze it in. Otherwise, I think I'd mostly like just to thank you for being so generous with your time today and reiterating that we have a friend in you and the other fire brigade members. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And it was my pleasure to speak to you. I hope I was educational and hope I gave you some information. And please feel free to call me, ask me a question, drop by if you're in the town. Because I'm always welcome to have everybody come in, and I do my best to answer your questions.
Well, I think Michael is with the Snohomish Tribune, so maybe one of these days he'll find time to wander over and meet you.
I hope so.
Good enough.
Because I think Michael did you cover the what was his name? The nickel battle case?
Yep.
Yeah, I did notice you were in the crowd. Good coverage, by the way. I like the story.
Yeah, he's a keeper, that's for sure. And as are you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And
thank you.
We're very grateful.